Okay, tonight I want to revisit. Last time I spoke about the Orishan. It's a very important shir. Um, we see the whole development of the Orishan. Because in the end, that's the main idea of the Mashiach. you know, because remember, you have to remember, when we speak about Geul or redemption, or liberation, whatever, freedom, it's freedom from several ideas, not just one. It's freedom from physical bondage, so to speak, which is the physical gullus. It's the fact that the Jews are in gullus. And you have to understand what gullus really is. Most people do not understand what gullus is. Gullus is not when we are under somebody's dominion. That's what it looks that way, And of course, the worse the dominion, the greater the gullus. That, of course, is gullus, but that's not the essential idea of gullus. The essential idea of gullus is that you cannot be what you can be. That's what it really is that you're not free to develop your potential. Because if you're in an environment, right, in a place that either persecutes you, or makes you suffer, whatever, right, or even if they allow you freedom, but if they're filled with materialism and so on, and you live there because where else you can live and so on, you're in gullus. Why? Because you cannot develop your spiritual potential. That's really what gullus is. It's not just the domination of a country or an empire, whatever it is. It's a fact that you cannot be what you could be. I always love I think it's the Army or is it the Marines? I'm not sure. I think it's the Army, where their slogan is, be all you can be. Boy, did they hit it on the button, What they're really saying is that we will set you out of gullus. That's what they're really saying, But that's an important idea. Gullus is the inability to activate or fulfill your potential. That's gullus. The way it's done, of course, is when you are in environments that either persecute you, they afflict you, right? Or they are incredibly steeped in materialism, and therefore, the Sahara bangs on the door and so on. That's why you're not making it, because you shouldn't be in that environment in the first place. That's really what gullus is. It's a very important idea, and so on. What I want to speak about in this context, so the Orishan is that liberation. The Orishan simply means that all of a sudden there comes a time when you're free, you're liberated. You now can be what you can be. You see, because the whole environment, the climate changes, where there's a Mashiach and there's Ruchnius, and now you can develop into really being a tremendous person. That's really what he does. He liberates you, he removes the gullus, which means he provides an environment where you can mamish grow, flourish, thrive in an environment that you can be a tremendous tzaddik or kodesh, holy man or whatever. And if you don't want to do it, you don't want to do it. But at least you can do it if you want. The potential is now able to be actualized. That's the essential idea of the Mashiach. Okay? And of course, to remove the physical constraints, and of course to develop and allow and even bring a spiritual environment. That's really what he does. So there's a Geula means two things: to remove you from the physical constraints, which are the nations of the world, and to allow you to really flourish and thrive in a tremendous spiritual environment. That's the real concept of the Orishan, Messianic light, and that's how he does it. By revealing that Messianic light, everything else just falls away, because that's the emes, that's the truth. Okay. Because you have to remember, the real disease that mankind suffers from is ignorance. That's why. They don't see that there's a spiritual dimension. They think that they are the great gift to mankind, and therefore they do whatever they want. They destroy your ability really to pursue. If you want to be spiritual, they destroy it, you see. So what the Mashiach does is he removes ignorance. He displays the real reality. And when people see reality, then you see all the promises that the Nevi'im say. The wolf will dwell with the land, and they will no longer make swords. They will turn their swords into plowshares. The famous Yashaya, and so on. Why? Because ignorance is removed. They see there's a ruchnistic reality, a spiritual reality, and now you can grow. It's really what he does in its simplest essential idea or form. Good. So that was last week. What I want to do this week, I only have 3 more lectures before I'm out of here to Eretz Yisrael, So I really have to finish the current events in 3 lectures, So in this year, I'm now go into something which I only spoke about generally. And that is, if Trump wins, which I believe he will, what is the hashkafa significance specifically to his winning? Before that, I only spoke generally, and so on, about the fact that Edom or Esav will have a tahara, and I went into why, a purification. But I want to be much more specific, so you know clearly what this means if he wins, which I believe he will, and so on. And as you will see, from the shir itself. Okay? So we're now going to really delve into what is really happening from a hashkafa standpoint between the election of Trump and Hillary. What's really happening? The first thing, we see from various chazal, the rabbanim, the rabbis, that Esav ultimately will have a tahara. He will have a purification. In other words, Esav, who is Edom, who is Rome, who is Christianity, who is Western civilization. And we know, as I said before, that Esav is divided into 3 parts. There's the gaiva, the arrogance, which is communism, Russia. And then there is the mirma, the fraud, the imposter, which is Europe, of Esav. And then there is the taiva, the pleasure, is of course America. That's why you have 3 parts of Western civilization, because Esav had 3 fundamental characteristics, as we see in the Torah. Important. We also know from what I said before.
Pigs can become kosher.
Oh, okay. You're beginning to see. Good. But it's much more than that, but I'm going to speak, okay? We also know that Esav, or Edom, is the toiv, I should say America is the toiv shebe Esav. Because Esav had a very good part to him. It wasn't, he was pretty bad, let's put it this way. The Torah calls him Esav HaRasha. Obviously that's pretty bad. If God calls you a Rasha, and then I think it's in which Navi was it, Novadia? Where he says, if Esav Shonesi, I hated Esav. That's bad news for you, if he hates you, But in any case, there is a good part to Esav, because we know Esav was exemplary, greater than all the Tanoim in Kibbutz Avim. It was incredible. I once mentioned that even Rabbi Shimon Gamliel said, it's interesting what he said, that I am the greatest in Kibbutz Avim, in honoring your father and mother. That's what he said, But I found my uncle Esav, he was greater than I, which is amazing.
But it wasn't Hashem Shemayim.
No, it was. It's not about Hashem Shemayim. He did what the Torah says. You need to honor your father and mother. Yeah, I'm not saying with L'Shem Shemayim in that sense. But in the end, he did do it. That's what he did, And so the Chazal give an example of what that means. It says before he used to visit his father or go in to see his father, he used to change his clothing and put on his big day Yom Tov, whatever they had then, right? It means his finery. You go to a wedding, right? Every time he went in to see his father, he changed into his wedding suit, right? Well, who does that today? Most people, they go into their father and say, hey, old man, get out of this chair. You know what I'm saying? People, we don't have the same, people don't have the same respect that they used to. But Esav was incredible. You can imagine what his kibbutz over him. In fact, it was so bad that's why Yaakov was incredibly afraid of Esav. When it says that Yaakov was going to meet Esav, right? It says, Vayira Yaakov me'oid, and Yaakov was petrified to meet Esav, his brother. Why? God promised him when he was on his way to Lavan that he would, he would be successful and so on. And God said, I will be with you. So the Gemara says, Shema Yigru Machet. God can say one thing, but if you sin, that thing can be taken away in a certain sense, But But the real problem, and that he was afraid, it's brought down in the Targum, in the Aramaic translation, that he was afraid of because of the Kibbud of Esav. Definitely, tremendously afraid, because that was an incredible schus, and we suffer because of that. The Kibbud of Aim that Esav had, which is a tremendous schus. In any case, so America is that Tov Sheba Esav. And I always like to mention, that's why America is the only nation basically has Mother and Father's Day. Where'd that come up from, right? Well, Mother and Father's Day is Kibbud of Aim, and so on, But America has a lot of also, as I mentioned, a lot of schus. Their foreign aid is incredible. And also they sponsor Torah. They, I hate to say it, but a lot of Lakewood is on Section 8 or whatever, food stamps and so on. That's a sponsoring of Torah. They actually, people learn Torah because of the America's magnanimity, whatever, right? Largesse of chesed to Jews. Not only do they allow you to learn, they give you money to learn. That's a moedig schus, which I talked about that in Japan and so on and so forth. Anyway, so therefore, Esav will have a tahara. I should say specifically, America will have a tahara. Okay, and you find Chazal say that. Let's take a look at some of the Chazals, which is very interesting. First one is what you mentioned, that it says ultimately, the chazir, the pig, is treif. Why? Because a pig has cleft hoofs, right? Split hoofs, but it doesn't chew its cud. And you have to have both to be a kosher animal. So the old thing is the chazir says, you see, I'm kosher, which of course is the old imposter. I'm kosher, see the outside, inside I'm really treif. Outside I'm fine. That's classic Esav, which is the concept of it being an imposter. So it says that in the end of time, the chazir will be kosher. So for those who always wanted to taste bacon and eggs, or pork, whatever that is, you'll get your chance. That's interesting. Why? Because the chazir represents Esav. And therefore, if the chazir is going to be kosher, that means that the nation it represents has to be kosher, tahara. That means the sins of Esav will be removed. So we see one chazal that's clear that Esav will have a tahara. We see that clearly, because of this chazal. Second idea.
Does it mean it's going to be related to Abba?
Oh, wait, don't jump. I'll get there. Wait. The second thing, which is also very important, when Yaakov was when Yaakov died and they brought him to Moras HaMachpelah, right? So Esav came and said, "Excuse me, who says he gets buried in Moras HaMachpelah? I'm also a descendant of Yitzchak. I want to get there." So there's different differences, but the main medrash is that Hushim ben Don, who was deaf, he didn't hear what's going on, so he couldn't believe what's going on. He says, this guy is stopping, it's a bizoyin to Yaakov Avinu, he's lying there, and because this guy is saying, hey, you can't give him the grave. The guy, he was saying it's his grave. So Hushim ben Don didn't know any chokhmas, He took a sword, but it says he could, and he just lopped off his head, just cut off Esav's head. But it's fun. It's interesting where it says that he couldn't cut off Esav's head from the front because Esav looked like Yaakov. It's a bit interesting. It shows you how much he resembled Yaakov Avinu. They're twins, but obviously they really looked alike, and so on. So he had to go to the back of Esav and then just cut off his head. So what happened to his head? So obviously the body fell, right? And the head rolled and fell into the grave with Yaakov Avinu. So the head is with Yaakov Avinu. What does that mean? Because it means that the head of Esav, which is the chokhmah, that there's part of Esav which is good, which is toiv, and that's the head, But the body of Esav, which is all the taiva and everything else, that was put outside the Moras HaMachpelah. I think they're buried in the field somewhere, But the head rolled into the kever and it lies at Yaakov's feet, which is interesting, The Yaakov is Yud Yaakov Akev, and it lies mamash at his Akev, which is interesting. But the Chazal, what that Chazal shows you, is that Esav, part of Esav is good, and not only was it good, It is buried in the Moras Machpelah. I mean, if a guy wants to be buried anywhere, that's the place. You have the 4 zugos, the 4 pairs, Adam and Chava, you have Avram and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, and then you have Yaakov and Leah. Rachel, that's a different story and so on, But, so therefore, Esav's head is buried in the same place as the office. So that tells you that there's something about Esav that's tahor, that's good, that's toiv. You see. Now, I will add my own interpretation, okay, that it means that the head of Esav means that nation that represents the head will be toiv, okay? What does the head do? What's the function of the head? It leads the body. The head is in charge, right? Without a head, you ain't going anywhere for many reasons, right? But with a head, right, the head is the organ, or rather I should say the structure, that is the leader of the body. The brain controls everything, you see. So I'm interpreting it that who is the head of Esav? Among these 3 parts of Esav, right? Who is the head? America. So therefore I'm interpreting that America will ultimately be Tahor. That's the head. America is the leader of the world. There's no question about that, right? It's the greatest nation on earth. It is the leader. And whatever America does, that's what the world does. You see. What was that?
How will it become Torah?
I'm going to get into that.
Didn't you say Russia can also take
Yes.
over?
Yeah. Not that Russia will become great, but it will not defy America when all of a sudden, so he's neutralizing the enemies of Israel, so they will not defy when Iran attacks. America will stand behind, Israel, and Putin will not defy him, even though he makes strange moves. He's supporting Iran, but that's because of self-interest. Doesn't mean he loves Iran, and so on. But self-interest can change overnight. We all know that. All of a sudden, your friends today, your enemies tomorrow. This goes on all the time. Doesn't make a difference. But as I mentioned in a couple of shurim back, Putin is an unusual guy who has a real soft spot for Israel. In any case, okay. So we have that concept of Esav's head in the Moras Machpelah, right? Then there's a chazal. It's an incredible chazal. It says Esav is in Gan Eden, and all of a sudden he sneaks to a higher position in Gan Eden. I think it's Gemara even, but
He
it's
starts in Gan Eden?
He's in Gan Eden, right? That's what it says. He's in. I'll get this source, but
How do you get to Gan Eden?
oh, what's he doing in Gan Eden in the first place, right? But he's in Gan Eden, except Esav is the wily guy, right? So he's sneaking up to get to a higher seat, whatever the seats are in Gan Eden, right? So it says that the Rebbeinu comes over and says, "Excuse me, what are you doing here? You don't belong in this seat. Get back to where you were down there, whatever," right? That's the Chazal, So the question is, excuse me, what's he doing in Gan Eden? How did Esav get in Gan Eden?
If it's referring to Antoninus, also Gilgal.
No. It says Esav, right? Or Antoninus was. Hold on to Antoninus. It's an interesting idea, but right. And the answer is because part of Esav becomes Tohor. That aspect of Esav that has a Tahara, right, belongs in Gan Eden. That's what it is. You see, that's another proof that Esav will be in Gan Eden, which means he will be in Olam Haba. Because once you're in Gan Eden, you get to Olam Haba. You see, so that's proof that Esav will be in Gan Eden, Olam Haba. But how could that be? Because it can only be because Esav, whatever part, has to have a Tahara. It's clear proof. Each one of these chazals are proof. Okay? But then I'll bring you the ultimate proof.
What does it mean he sneaks? It's oil and
Well, whatever it means, it does. Obviously it's not clear. But however, how does he wind up? Wiggles his way into a higher position. Obviously these. You have to. They don't mean literally, but the fact that he's in Gan Eden is literal. But how he wiggles his way up to the to a higher position. Of course we don't know what Gan Eden is. We don't know where it is. Maybe we do know where it is, but and so on. Anyway, but then there's the ultimate proof, which is an Yalkut Ruveni, which I found, which is it's incredible proof that Esav will have his tahara. It says that in the end, this is in Yalkut Ishayahu, which I think is part of Yalkut Ruveni, whatever, and so on. Anyway, it says there that the Moshe is going to take all the sins of the Jewish people and throw it on Esav. Throw it on Esav, which will mean that ultimately he will say you're the cause of all their sins because of what you did to them, the climate you provided, the provocation, you name it, right? And so on. So Esav is going to say to the Rebbeinu Shalom, basically, with what can I hold it? Can I do this? Hold on to this. I can't bear this. It's like what Cain said. Remember what the Rebbeinu Shalom said? Where's your brother? And he says, my brother's keeper. So Rebbeinu Shalom says, what are you talking about? The blood of your brother is crying to me from the ground. So Cain did tshuva. He says, Godel avayni minsai. My sin is greater than I can bear. So what was the tshuva? Because he said, my sin. That's the tshuva. He said, Godel avoini minsoi. He didn't say, hey, you gave me something which I can't tolerate. He said, my sin is greater, which means he admitted that he was wrong. And the Moshe, all he needs is a Pesach for your tshuva. And he's already halfway there with you, you know? So therefore he was much gentler to Cain, where you put a simon and you can't kill Cain, whatever. So Esav says to Moshe that I can't bear this. With what do I have that I can bear this? You know, which means that, hey, listen, you know, you're right and I'm finished. But I can't do this. Which he's really saying is, you know, you have to have Rahmanas or whatever. That was a tshuva. So Moshe did an interesting thing. He took the avoinus, which was in Esav himself, and he put it on his garments. And the garment turned red. So what that means is that in some way he mitigated or he softened the judgment against Esav. So it's no longer on the Esav himself, it's on his garments. And the garments, we know, can be taken off. You know, they're now movable, you know, can be removed. And therefore you're okay. You just take off the dirty clothing and put on some new stuff, right? So that's what it says. But then it says it's something more outstanding. It says then what the Rebbeinu did for Esav is he took those garments which are red and he made them as white as snow. Tahara. Isn't that what we say by Yom Kippur? Kashelad Yalbinu, that he will take our sins and make it as white as snow. That's mamish what he does to Esav.
That's not rachamim, that's out and out.
Yeah. Whatever it is, a moide kapara. I mean, it's a true kapara. You know?
How is Esav Zilchah to such a kapara?
That's the medrash. It doesn't say anything more than that. But that's astounding that he's going to take his averis and make it white as snow. And that's what we say. You know, you take our sins and made it white. That clearly indicates that in the end, Esav will be toho. No sins. That's how he gets into Gan Eden, by the way. Right? But that's a tremendous medrash. You also find right in the same medrash, where it's also amazing, it says, Sedoim and Amora, La'osad Lovay will be misrapen. They'll be cured. It's another incredible statement, you know. I mean, clearly the Moshe has a different agenda. There are ways he does it and so on. Okay. But what you see from all these midrashim is that there will be a tahara of Esav. You see. That question is when. Not if, but when. So we now know that Esav Horosha, the Toiv Sheba Esav, will have a tahara, will have a purification. And he'll get into Gan Eden. That's clear from all these midrashim, Chazal 4, that I just brought down. So that concept, in many ways, is indisputable. What does this mean, Api Ashkofa? What tahara will he have? Now, until now, I've been saying basically that tahara is his sins will be forgiven, right? But it's much deeper than that. And you have to hear this very important concept, which answers different questions, which in many ways is an unknown concept, which is very interesting. Then you'll understand what this means and what I think is about to happen to America. Yaakov and Esav, they're fighting around by Rivka, in her uterus, right? They're battling it out, right? And she goes, she doesn't know what's going on, she goes to the Shem B'Eva, whatever, and he gives her a whole, Shem B'Eva, whatever, which was obviously with Nevi'im, they gave her a whole prophecy and so on, that Ravia, that that Shnei Goyim B'Vitnech, there are two nations in your, right? And so on. And Shnei Goyim B'Vitnech means the two nations, means that there's an equality here, you see. So what will be the ultimate thing? The ultimate thing will be what? That Rav Yavoy Tzoya, the older will serve the younger, right? Rav Yavoy Tzoya is really the end. One nation will be always greater than the other, and the older will serve the younger. Okay? What does that mean, the older will serve the younger? You know, what Rivka should have, or what Shem B'Eva should have said, the older one, hey, it has nothing to do with the younger one. What do you mean he will serve the younger? That means that Yaakov and Esav have a connection where Esav serves Yaakov. You know? What she should have said is that, you know, one's going to go one way and the other guy's going to go the other way. You know what I'm saying? What's a serving? Right? So what they're telling Rivka is a very profound idea. There are two guys that you're carrying. Okay? And by the way, I gave a share a long time ago, right? That Esav was born, he was really an Ov. There are really four of us, if you remember. And there are four Imors. Most people don't know that. Okay? The old question is why there are four Imors, right? Matriarchs, right? And there's only three of us. And the answer is there are four of us. What? There are really four of us. I have 17 cassettes on this, which is now on, you put it, right? It's on the internet. It's on TorahThinking.com. 17 tapes, which is 25 hours on Yaakov and Esav, three parshas, you know, told us, and all the way till the end of the Chumash, and so on. Anyway, but that's the bottom line. What does that mean? Because Avraham Avinu was an Ov, obviously. He represents Chesed. Yitzchok was an Ov, patriarch. He represents Gvura, right, which is the left side. And the middle is Tferes. But the middle has two parts. There's the right side of the middle and the left side of the middle. So the right side of the middle was represented by Yaakov. And the left side of the middle was represented by Esav. So really there are four of us. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Esav. But since they're both in the midah, the characteristic or the sphera of Tferes, therefore they're twins, because they're both in the same sphera. That's why they're twins. The problem was, we know, that Esav became a Rasha. So therefore, he left a vacuum on the left side of Tferes. You see, he really was an Ov. In fact, the Medrash says that, it's an incredible Medrash where you see that if Esav had not become a Rasha, which I once mentioned, Yaakov was supposed to have 6 Shvatim, and Esav was supposed to have 6 Shvatim. Wow. You know? So what do we see? That Yaakov and Esav are fundamental parts of the Tikkun process. Both of them have to do the Tikkun. What? Wait, I can get that, right? That was the original plan. Because Tiferes is right and left. There's a right side and there's a left side of Tiferes. Because the middle has some ingredients of the Rechesed and some ingredients of the left. One guy can be completely in one thing, but one guy has two different characteristics. You know, it's going to split the guy in half. It's called a multiple personality.
Yaakov did it.
What?
Yaakov had to do it in the end.
Oh, so what happened? So therefore, but the important thing, get this, is that Esav was originally an Ov, a patriarch, as great as Yaakov Avinu. In fact, there's a Rishon called the Paneach Rozo that says that who is greater, Yaakov or Esav? He says that Esav was greater than Yaakov because he had a much more difficult job. How do we know? Because if you add the gematria of Yaakov with a Vav, right, it's 1/2 of Esav. The gematria of Esav is twice that of Yaakov. Exactly. So he says, therefore, the Bechina, the category of Esav was greater than Yaakov, because Yaakov was into Torah. Esav was into fighting the Satan, to destroy the Satan. Much harder job. Anyway, but what comes out of all this is what? That they're both involved in the tikkun process. Correct? That's what you see. So, so the idea is that even though Asa became a Rasha, and he was replaced with who? With Yosef, because Yosef is a Chatziov. That's really what it is. Because now Yaakov, what happened? Yaakov had to do his position, which is right side of Tveres, and Yaakov took over the job of Esav, but he could only take over, if you remember the Shir, half the job of Esav, and Yosef took the other half. That's why you need Yaakov and Yosef to compete with Esav, you see. So therefore what we see here is that even though Yosef, or I should say even though Esav became a Rasha, and he went out of the whole Parsha, he didn't. He did not go out of the Parsha of Tikkun. You see, people think he went out of the Parsha of Tikkun. He didn't. He's still in it. How? Got it? That's the question. So there's a Moedig Medrash, and that's a tremendous, profound idea. The Medrash says like this. It says in the Torah, the Rav Yavoid Tzoir, and the older will serve the younger. Yes? So that means that Esav, right, will serve the younger, right? Because the first Esav has to serve the younger because the main thing is Yaakov in terms of the Torah. That's his function. But Esav will serve by destroying the Satan and the whole side of evil. Fine. But the Medrash says that in the Torah there's no Esav. So you can read two ways. Rav Yavoid Tzoir, the older will serve the younger, or Rav Ya'aved Tzoir, he will afflict the younger. It's a Medrash. You see? That means, so, and either way, he will serve the Yaakov. Whether he assists Yaakov, which means that Esav remains an Ov, except his job is to destroy the Satan, or he doesn't assist Yaakov that way, he will assist him in another way by subjecting Yaakov to Yisurin. And if you remember, that was method C for the Tikkun. Method A is mitzvahs, method B is tshuva, method C is Yisurin.
Yisurim is not really a tikkun device in as much as it's progressing the agenda. It's really just fixing what happened.
No, but Yisurin does do tikkun. It does a tikkun. I'm not going into how it does it, but it does. So therefore, what the Medrash is saying, an incredible concept. There's Ya'avoid and Ya'aved. Either way, Esav is going to do it. But wait a minute. I understand if it's Ya'avoid, he's going to serve the younger, means he'll do the tikkun, with the obvious way. But Ya'aved, he does the tikkun, the answer is yes. Because like, if Yaakov deserves punishment because he sins, then Esav will Ya'aved, he will be the one that makes Yaakov suffer, and as a result of that, the tikkun of the bria, of the creation, will be done. What an incredible medrash. What does that show you? That Esav is still doing the job of tikkun. Except he shifted his roles from Ya'avoid to serve the younger, to afflict the younger, to persecute or punish the younger. But it's the same. But that concept means that Esav, who's the Bechor, right, is still doing part of the tikkun. That's a very critical idea, which most people don't recognize. And that's why you find a tremendous Rambam. Rambam says, right, that Christianity is going to do a tremendous job of Toiv. It's going to bring the belief, Christianity, it's going to bring the belief, because mankind was pagan. It's going to bring the belief of what? Of a redemption, a Geula, and a Redeemer, a Mashiach. And the concept basically of one God, or the chief God, even though they had another two going on, right? Even they believe that God is really, in the end, he's the Ika. Many Christians only pray to God, by the way. I don't know if you know that. They don't even bother with the other guy, you know? It's like, you know, if you have connections, what do I have to do with the son? What do I need a broker for? I'll go straight to the boss. So the question is, wait a minute, why is Christianity doing this? What kind of job is that? And the answer is because, as I said, Esav is Edom, Edom is Rome, Rome became Christianity, there you are, and Christianity is the Western civilization, 3 parts. So therefore, it's a tremendous understanding now why the Rambam says that. Because Esav is still part of the Tikkun. And therefore, what's the Tikkun? To bring the belief. The Jews were not Zercha to do that. Because of the Chorban bias, the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. So Moshe said, you're not going to do that job. Christianity, Esav, will do the job of bringing mankind the truth of a geula, redemption, a Mashiach, a Messiah, and the concept basically of one God against polytheism, which is
It's
paganism.
distorted, but still good concepts.
Of course it is. But the concept that the world does have a redeemer. See, but till now the world doesn't have a redeemer. It's going to go like this all the time. But that there is an end, and the end is good. It's a redemption, and there is a redeemer, a Mashiach. Okay, they picked the wrong guy. I mean, whatever. Hey, it's in the. You don't expect me.
Says at the end,
Yeah.
when it started off, that they're going to realize their mistake that their parents gave them.
Yeah. That they certainly. Sure, but I'm just saying, why were they picked 2,000 years ago? And the answer is because it's still part of the Tikkun process. Most people don't realize, Asa, forget about it. In Christianity, all that. It's true. However, they still have the job of Tikkun because Ya'aved, that's what it is. Now you begin to understand something very important. Wait a minute. If Asa has the job of serving the younger, right? Either way, through assisting him to do mitzvahs, which is what America does, right? Now you begin to see what that is. America is really doing the job of Esav, to whatever extent it does, And America also is Ya'aved, because they keep screaming for a two-state solution. They're doing both at the same time. But they're still doing stuff which is good. And one of them is they sponsor Torah, which is incredible. Therefore, we now understand something very important, that Esav has Ya'avoid, and Ya'aved, he does the Tikkun, and that's why he's in Gan Eden. The question is there a shift? Is Esav going to go from Ya'aved to Ya'avoid? That is the question. Because really for 2,000 years, he's been doing some Ya'avoid by redeem and redemption, but is he going to switch from this Christian pogroms, inquisitions, pogroms, expulsions, and all this kind of stuff? And the answer is yes. That's the Tahara. Now you understand what the Tahara is. The Tahara is that Esav will go from Ya'aved to Ya'avoid. Now I'm being very specific. Till now I just said Tahara, so it sounds like God's going to, his sins. No. He's going to switch from the old job, which is to persecute, to afflict, right? And to harm Yaakov. He's going to go back to what he was doing primarily, which is Ya'avoid, helping Yaakov do the job.
In America, it happened to a large extent.
What was that?
In America, it happened to a large extent.
To a certain, yes. But America still, with Obama, it's still, they want two-state solution. It's not just Obama, it's Bush, Clinton. They're all, they're all terrible what they did with Israel. They allowed the Arabs to kill Jews left and right, and they're screaming two-state when everybody knows a two-state solution is the end of Israel. If you gave them Gaza and they'll go crazy, you give them, part of Israel, forget about it. They're going to attack Israel, destroy it from within. Everybody knows that. So how dare they give an example or advice? They know what's going to happen. Every think tank about the Middle East knows what's going to happen if you give the Arabs a part of Israel. They all know. So then why is they saying that? What kind of an evil dominates their thinking? And the answer is because they don't care. Because that's part of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism used to be to burn the Jews down. Now it's to side with the Arabs and make them give up half their land. So now the Arabs will destroy them. It's just another form of anti-Semitism. That's all.
Speaking of the Arabs, Yishmael doesn't have a Torah?
Oh, wait. Well, Yishmael is different than Esav. Esav is easy, which I'll get to. But the main idea is that the Torah of Esav really means that he will go from Ya'aved to Ya'avoid. And that's why he gets Gan Eden. You see. So the question is, when will this happen? And now we understand what's happening. What I believe is the one who's going to switch from Ya'aved to Ya'avoid is Donald Trump. You notice what he says? What does he say? We'll make America great. If you hear his speeches in the last week, wow, He wants to really make America great again economically. It's not just money. This is what he says. I believe what he says he's going to do. He wants to make equality to all citizens, whether he be black, Asian, Christian, Jewish, Muslim. Yeah, he's be careful about Muslims. He has to. Because you see what's going on in the world? They're blowing Europe up all over the place. Of course he has to have extreme to vet them. What is it called? Extreme?
Prejudice?
No, vetting. Of course he has to vet them. Of course. It's not that he's against Muslims. People are stupid. What are you talking about? He's not against Muslims. But they're coming, they're killing Europe. They're bombing everywhere. So of course you have to vet them. He didn't say that he's against Muslim per se, but you have to stop. You have to not let them in from countries that have all this going on. It's simple what he's saying. But forget about the agenda of the left and the media and Hillary and Obama, whatever and so on, It's obvious. But what he wants to basically do, and he says, and I believe he will do it, is that he will make America great, which means not only economically, it means getting tough with all the Rishoyim in foreign countries. It's like when the cat's away, the mice will play. He's the cat that's about to come back into the world and say, excuse me, what are you doing? Why are you killing people? It's like he's gonna put the America back on the police beat. That's what he's gonna do. He's not gonna tolerate any nonsense, you see. So it's not just America. He's gonna now enforce the law, and he says law and order in America. I mean, everything he says is incredibly logic, and I believe he will keep to that. What does that sound like? And I guarantee you, right? His son-in-law, Kushner, whatever his name is, Kushner, yeah, he's Jewish. He's religious. Ivanka is certainly religious. She converted. She's from, Jason Greenblatt, I think his name is his major counsel. The guy's an Orthodox Jew. He knows Jews. He hangs around with them.
Real estate.
And real estate. I told you why the whole.
So why does she have such a big following?
Wait. Five. Wait. Don't jump. Gotta keep it simple. Therefore, I believe he will turn America from Ya'aveh to Ya'avoid. Because everything he says indicates that. He's going to really be a tremendous president in the United States. Tremendous. Really equality, prosperity, and peace with law and order. He's going to stand up to all the nations of the world. He's going to side with Israel when he realizes that they cannot make peace with Israel, as I've said before, because it's theologically impossible. All the ideas I gave in the previous show and so on. That's the Tahar of America. You now understand what it is, okay? Specifically, what it is. See? And that's why I believe, remember I said that the Gematria of Donald Trump is Gematria Mashiach ben David? You know what that means? Do you know what that means? That his name is a Gematria? Of course, it doesn't mean he's Mashiach ben David. Let's forget that, right? That's out. But you don't realize something. Somebody who will turn a nation completely diametrically opposite is a Messiah. For them, yes. He, I believe, is the Mashiach of Edom. Isn't that interesting? Because think about it. What does the Mashiach do? Right? He turns a nation, basically that's going awry. I mean, it's collapsing with the evil and the immorality. He turns it around. That's a Messiah. Especially if it's incredibly significant. Do you know who the Mashiach of the Sultan is? He had a Messiah. Do you know who that is? Who is the Messiah of Amalek? Hitler, yes. Do you know Hitler was a Mashiach? A Mashiach is nothing more than an anointed one, right? That completely reverses the order of something. And Hitler, Yamach Shemoy V'Zichroi, right, was the Mashiach of Amalek. But that's really, he had the koich of a Mashiach. You couldn't stop this guy. What does that sound like? In other words, what he was is he was the greatest agent of the Sultan that the world has ever seen. He was a pure Amalek. He hated the Jews viscerally. That's a Mashiach. And he turned the entire Germany and half of Europe into hating the Jews. In other words, he made such a significant alteration in the muzzle of Jews, that's a Mashiach. But it's a Mashiach of the Satan. Sounds funny. He's a Messiah, But that's who he really was. He was a Messiah of evil. Trump, I believe, is the Messiah of Edom, of Esau. And therefore he will take them from Ya'aved to Ya'avoid. From someone who afflicts Chai Israel to somebody who will assist them. And believe me, he's going to be fabulous with the Jewish people. Like I said, he knows them. Real estate, that's why he's in real estate, I said, because there's so many Jews in real estate. All the ideas, And Ivanka and his brother-in-law, not brother-in-law, and his son-in-law and his chief legal counsel and so on and so forth. He's got a lot of Jews working for him. And he likes them, you see. Therefore, that's who he is. You see, I've now told you specifically what I believe he is. That's the underlying concept. That really he's a Mashiach of Edom. Because he's going to turn Edom around from Ya'aved to Ya'avoid. He's going to purify Edom. Interesting. I realize some people, it's not going to sit very well with them.
What's the Yishmael? You didn't talk to them about Yishmael?
No. Yishmael is different. Yishmael has a big problem. I mentioned this, You notice one thing. What are the Jews called? Odom. Omer Rab Shimon Yochai. Atem kriyim Odom. You see, it says Odom ki yomes be'oil by Paraduma. And Odom, a man, ki yomes be'oil, if he will die in a tent. And then there's how do you purify the guy who touches it, and so on and so forth, So Rab Shimon says, Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, the great Rab Shimon says, who's this Odom? So he said it means Jews. Only they can create impurity through what's called a tent. We're not getting into the laws of Taharas and so on. Tumah Tahara. Atem kriyim Odom. Jews are called Odom. But the Umas Oilim are not called Odom. They're not called Odom. There are reasons. Because Odom means when you are man, that means you resemble Odom Marishan. Odom Marishan had a neshama of a Yisrael. In the beginning, I once mentioned that the Rebbe didn't intend that the Jews should do the tikkun at all. He gave it to mankind to do the tikkun. It was only after 2,000 years that mankind refused, then they sinned. Then he gave it to Avram Avinu. But until then, any man could do the tikkun, you see. That's why Odom Rishon wasn't Jewish. He didn't have to be. He was the Yisrael. Because the concept of Yisrael means he has an neshama that can do the rectification, the tikkun, you see. So that's Odom. We are Odom, which means we can do the tikkun. We can rectify creation because our neshamas are connected to all the 5 ilamas, 5 spiritual worlds. You see. Now, who also is called Odom? Almost Edom, isn't he? You ever notice? What's the difference in spelling between Edom and Odom? The vav, right? If you take Odom and you put a vav in the middle, right? It's not Odom, it's Edom. What does the vav represent? The nachash, the snake. The problem with Edom is the snake, right? But if you take out the snake, what does he become? Odom. There you are. That's the Ya'aved to Ya'avoid. You see? And as we get, remember what I told you, that the Satan is dying? What did I tell you? I told you the Satan is dying? Yes? What does that mean? That means the vav is about to be removed from Edom. What's going to be left? Odom.
What about Para Odom?
Wait, no, I knew something. Wait. It's a very good question. You got to wait. I can only talk at a certain speed. But you hear what I'm saying? It's interesting. And therefore he's going to be an Odom. But that means he's going to have to revert back to Ya'avoid. He will serve the younger. You see? But he's an Odom. That shows you that really intrinsically he's an Odom. Except the Satan took him over and became a Rasha. The Satan became his Malach, his angel, if you remember in the Chumash, because the angel of Esau fought Yaakov Avinu, and that was the Satan who was the angel of Esau. So on, right? So therefore, you add the Vav. But after you take out the Vav, it's Odom, wham, he's back. That means, you know, so it's funny. He's an Odom with a Nachash. He can still do the Tikkun. But since he's got the snake in him, it's only where he persecutes the Jew. It's interesting, you know, to look at that word and so on and so forth, you know. But remember, the key idea here is that the Satan is going crazy. Why? Do you see what the opposition to Trump is? It's beyond belief. Obama hates him. He's campaigning actively against Trump. And they're all trying to vilify him, denigrate him, degrade him, demolish him, destroy him, his reputation. That's Obama, right? Then you got, of course, Hillary. I mean, in fact, that's the only strategy in her campaign, because what did she do? What'd she do? She's a completely incompetent person. So her whole strategy in the campaign is to destroy him. I mean, imagine that's all the campaign is all about. Get Trump. You see, who else is against him? The media. It is unbelievable to watch. In fact, it's infuriating. Because how dare they? Their job as journalists. A journalist is supposed to represent both sides without bias. That's what journalism is. What they have become is they're not interested in journalism. They're interested in propaganda. They have become a propaganda machine for Hillary. I mean, whatever happened to journalism? It doesn't exist. But the chutzpah of the media to do that. How dare you do that? Your job is journalism, not to lambaste Trump. Then quit the New York Times and then do it on your own. But don't call yourself a journalist. It's unbelievable what they're doing. So they're against him. It's like whatever Trump says, they try to twist and turn. It's just incredible. Then who else is against Trump? The Republicans. It's a whole bunch of Republicans against Trump. Excuse me. He's your nominee. What are you doing? You crazy? You'd rather have Hillary, the crook, the cheat, the liar, pathological liar, the incompetent, who's going to put, I told you, the greatest evil she'll do is all she'll do is put the balance of the court, liberal, progressive, left, and she's destroyed the United States. Because they're all going to vote. Yeah, homosexuality, of course. By the way, you have a yeshiva. Do you know that you have to put a rebbe in the yeshiva who's a homosexual? It's too bad. Why? Because that's what you understand. You're not allowed to discriminate anymore against the homosexual. You see, so you gotta have him. And not only that, you're gonna have to make him the mashgiach of the yeshiva, and he's gonna be giving the mussar shmooze. That's next.
That's transcend the bathroom, same thing.
Yeah, the bathrooms.
In Yeshiva University, there was such a...
They did that already?
Years
Okay, I don't want to mention names.
No, but I'm saying without names. But they did it. There was a guy that they held, he was from Yenachevra.
Yeah.
He kept up to his job and he was fighting as much.
Yeah. But it's only, but that's because the Supreme Court has backed off. But all you need to do is give them another liberal and it's over with. They are the Supreme Court is the greatest threat to religion in the United States. They're going to decimate it by making religion do, you're not allowed to discriminate. So you're going to have all these guys.
You can't discriminate against religion either.
What?
You can't discriminate against religion either.
Well, that's because of the Supreme Court. Where did the Supreme Court get a hold of it? Don't worry, they'll interpret the Constitution in such a way where your next mashgiach is homosexual. I guarantee, don't worry about it, What's the end of America? You know why? Because America will be chayav misa. Homosexuality is what destroyed is what brought the Mabel. So that's what brought the Mabel. Homosexuality, right? So therefore, they're going to make America chayav misa, subject to the death penalty by God. Because God will not tolerate a nation that is homosexual because nobody's populating the earth. It's ridiculous what's going on. And that's why Rome fell. All of them fell, And as an agav, I might as well say, tragically, that's why Louisiana is hit again. We talked about Katrina, why it happened in 2005, because the Southern Decadence Day was on Wednesday. The storm hit on Monday, went over the levees on Tuesday, and wiped out New Orleans on Wednesday. Or even Tuesday. Why? Because on Wednesday there's a holiday that they have called Southern Decadence Day, where the police and the whole government doesn't even look what's happening. They look away, and all kinds of perversions and immoralities take place. Homosexuality, I didn't want to go into it. Yeah, and so all kind of stuff. So Baruch Hashem said, hey, listen, I can't destroy the whole America, but I'm going to destroy all New Orleans, right? And a hurricane is a mini Mabul. That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what's happening now because they're still doing Southern Decadence Day. The Baruch Hashem gave them 10 years, 11 years to do tshuva. They're still doing it. I think it's supposed to happen in the beginning of September or whatever. Southern Decadence Day. So Hashem just wiped him out with another mini marble. I mean, it's tragic. It's terrible to watch. There's no question about that, you know. But I don't stand these people. You know, there's no fear of God, you know. And it's just terrible to watch Louisiana. You can't look at it. The papers, you can't believe the water's like, you know, who knows how many people have died, and the loss economically is staggering, and so on. But again, it's the same concept. This kind of hurricane, whatever it was, is a mini marble. And again, but what shows you this time, that Moshe is no longer after New Orleans. He's after Louisiana. Which shows you that a state which is chayav misa. Why? Because the government looked away. It's no longer private individuals. It's the government that legitimatizes by looking away, right? You can do it. That means they mechayev misa the whole state. And that's what's happening, you know. And that's what the Supreme Court's going to do. And if America's chayav misa, you don't want to even be within 5,000 miles of America. When the God's going to go after these guys, he could wipe out the whole America. It's not a big deal. Earthquakes in California, you know what I'm saying? It just what God can do is ridiculous to this country, and so on, you know. But anyway, that was an aga. But anyway, so therefore, this is what's happening, you know. Yishmael has another problem. The problem with America, it's a civilized country. You know, the problem with Esau, he's civilized because he's an Adam. His problem is that as a civilized man, he does evil. That's his problem. Yishmael is different. Yishmael is not civilized. He's a para-Adam. In other words, he's an Adam, right? But he's a para. He's a wild man. It's an uncivilized person. Who ever heard of a parent, right, telling his kid to commit suicide, to be a shahid, a martyr? This is not normal. You know, that parents celebrate the death of their kids if their kids kill Jews or whatever. It's your kid. You know, what does a kid know? You know, it's like there was a father pushing his kid into the way of soldiers and say, go in there, you know. He wanted the Israeli soldiers to kill his son. That's not normal. This is not civilization. That's the problem with Yishmael or the Arabs. They're not civilized. You know, I'm not saying all the Arabs are like that. But the ones who lead are not civilized. That's why the Torah calls them para-Adam. You see, they're a wild man. It's harder for them to straighten out, to become civilized, than it is for a civilized person to become less evil. It's harder. So their refuah, you know, and I told you there's a medrash that says Sodom and Amorah is going to be healed. You know, why does it say healed? Why doesn't it say that the Rosh is going to also put their sins like snow? You know what I'm saying? Because it's much harder. They got to be, because they are much more diseased. What Esau does, who's evil is not a disease. It's a more moral. You can call it a moral disease, but it's not the disease. To be uncivilized is a disease. There's something wrong with your brain. You know what I'm saying? What are you doing? You know. So therefore, they have to be cured. But I don't believe that they will be cured now. I believe that's only at the entrance of Mashiach.
That's significant of Yishmael's tshuva that did that.
Yes, yeah, because Yishmael did tshuva, correct, yeah. And also Yishmael, I don't know if you realize that, but Yishmael also was part of the tikkun process. That's why he had 12 sons, 12 tribes. Yishmael himself was part of the tikkun process. Yeah, that's why he had 12. That's why he had 12 kids.
Yishmael
But as I was saying, the reason why everybody's against Trump, you know why? Because like I said, he's a Mashiach Edom. And guess what? If the Satan is dying, who's his greatest agent? His greatest agent is Esau. He's about to lose him. That's why he's going bananas. It's a Satan going bananas because if Esau, Edom, has a Tahara, he's going to go crazy because he needs these guys. And no, Esau is still much more powerful than Ishmael. You look, listen, the world is led by America. Let's not kid ourselves. It's not led by Saudi Arabia or any of these guys. America is the world. You don't realize that, you know. That's why Hillary is so dangerous. Because if that Supreme Court turns America into a immoral place, then the whole world will follow. America, remember the head of Esav? Is the leader of the world. Not just the leader of Esav. America's the leader of the world. Everybody looks to America, for fashion, economics. Let's face it, America is the greatest nation on earth, and it's the leader of everybody. Everybody looks to America for protection, for security, for economy, everything, So if America is destroyed because of Hillary, the whole world is destroyed. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why I believe that Hillary will lose, because the Bolshevik is not going to destroy the world. Because that's the problem. I believe if Hillary gets in, besides all the economic disasters, to raise tax and let in hundreds of thousands and thousands of terrorists and Syrians, I'm not even going into that. But the whole world will be destroyed. Because when America becomes evil and immoral, that's the rest of the world. And I don't believe the Moshe is going to do that. That's one of the ideas that prompt me to say Trump will win. In any case, we now understand what the Tahara is, who Trump is, and what I believe will happen, because of all of these ideas and so on, Why does the Moshe want to do that? Why does he want to do that? Because I didn't speak about it yet. I only have 2 more shurim to go, but I'm going to speak about it, because I mentioned that the Mashiach cannot come, because if he comes, he's going to reveal a spirituality, an awe, a light, an enlightenment, an illumination that is so unbelievably powerful, it'll kill everybody. Therefore, Jews need a hachana. They need a preparation. They need what's called a rehabilitation. You see, you cannot have a rehabilitation when America is going down the tubes. Can't be. Everybody's so anxious, right? Is so worried and so on. You don't have the tranquility to rehabilitate. You need to rehabilitate in a good place, in a rehabilitation facility. Therefore, America has to be able to generate tremendous peace and prosperity, and then in that prosperity, something will happen where there will be a tremendous turnaround of the Jews in America and therefore the entire world, in order to rehabilitate them so they can receive the awe of the Mashiach. In fact, the whole world to receive the awe of the Mashiach. That's why. That's why the Moshe, I believe, is going to be Matar America, which means to make America great, so that the rehabilitation of the Jews is possible. It always comes back to the Jews. Always. You see. But in order to do that, like I say, you can't rehabilitate in World War II. You can't be rehabilitated in a country that's evil, immoral. How could you do that? And so on. It's impossible. Therefore, peace and prosperity in a country, and that it flourishes and so on, has to happen for the rehabilitation process to happen, which must happen in order for the Jews to have the Mashiach. That's why. That's a very important statement which I'm saying, which I will explain next week, about the whole concept of the Mashiach. He himself has to be rehabilitated. And then the Jewish people have to be rehabilitated too. And then I will speak about in the next year and so on. But anyway, that's why. And I want to just tell you something. One of the major statements that's how you know something is messianic. It's not always, but it's a very important condition, idea. By David HaMelech, everybody thought he was a mamzer. There's a whole medrash where they thought he was a mamzer, right? Familiar with the medrash, whatever, and so on. Anyway, so and all of a sudden not only he's not a mamzer, he was the king of Israel, Melech Yisrael, which is David Melech Yisrael, and so on, which is incredible. So David HaMelech says something which is profound, and it's really the messianic pattern. What is that pasuk? In Hallel, where it says, okay, what? Oitcho ki ani soni. Oitcho ki ani soni v'atihi li Yeshua. I will thank you and praise you because you answered me and you became my salvation. Okay? Even moasu aboinam, the cornerstone, the stone that the builders despised, Hoyesel Roish Pino became the cornerstone of the entire structure. Even Moasu Haboinim, right? Me'es Hashem Hoyesel Zois. This can only have come about by God, and it is a wonderment in our eyes, right? So right? Also Hashem, and this is the day that the Bonsham made Nogilu v'nismecha boy. A messianic figure is always despised. It's interesting. You take a look at David HaMelech, right? Even Moshe Rabbeinu was despised. He had to run away from Paro, right? They wanted to kill him, so he was despised. You know, he had to run away. Yosef was despised, right? They put him in prison. You know, many messianic figures they come out of nowhere. You see, because the Bonsham, you know, it's interesting with the way Bonsham works. It's like, everybody is expecting the Mashiach to be this incredible tzaddik, incredible godel, unbelievable Talmid Chacham. Yeah, eventually he will be. But he's the guy that you don't even look at twice. That's who Mashiach is. And you find all the Messianics, the Mashiach and so on and so forth, they were always despised or they were secret, like Yehud and Tamar, right? And Peretz, you know, became the beginning of the Messianic birthright and so on. And he, of course, you had Peretz from Yehud and Tamar, and that was Zima, or looked like Zima, which it really wasn't, but anyway. The pattern of Mashiach is always Even Moasu Haboinim. See, that the stone that the builders despised.
We're on.
What?
We're on.
We're on. Okay. Anyway. Where was I? So that's why there's such opposition to Trump, because he's about to start something which is a major reversal of the job of Esav, from Yaveh to Yavoid. Now we understand what's going on, because what you're going on is it's astounding. You've never seen that in any political situation. You know, to such an extent with the media, everybody is against him. Even his own party, Republican Party, a lot of the people, they're just against him, and they're crazy. You know, Kasich and what he called and Bush, you know, and what he called they all promised that they would support the nominee, and these guys never showed up to the convention. So is that better that Hillary should destroy America? And what's wrong with these people? You know, that shows you the gaiva of these people, the arrogance of these people. You know, why don't they grow up? They can't forgive. They're fuming that he won. You know, and he said things which maybe were not right. You know, look, it's a rough campaign, and that's what politics is.
I think they're personally scared because he's going to prosecute them. If he wins, he'll lead the
That's the government. Yeah, that's the government. But I'm talking about Jeb Bush and Ted Cruz and Kasich. You know, whatever. A lot of these guys said they would support him, the nominee, and they're not. How foolish can you be, really? What is it? Like, they can't get over the fact that either they lost or that he offended. He did offend them. There's no question. But then they did it to him. I mean, that's what politics is. You know, like they say, you know, if you can't stand the heat, then get out of the kitchen. You know, it's what it is. You expect that to happen. Anyway. But remember also, it's not just that Trump has to create a climate of peace and prosperity, tranquility. Remember, he's also has to do what? He has to protect Israel. That's also. Not only to create a climate to rehabilitate Klal Yisrael, where they can be rehabilitated and so on. He also is there to protect Israel against the upcoming war with the Arabs and the UN and all these guys. Very, 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 very important. You know. You know, I have to mention one thing which is always funny. Trump does have a problem. It's very hard for him to suffer insults. Very hard. You know, even when he really, so don't respond. Forget about these guys. These guys are nobodies, you know. Look, he's got problems. Whatever it is, you know. That's his problem, you know. So what does he do? He openly goes against them, even if it's not appropriate. But I want to tell you something, which people do not understand. So people look at him and say, what's wrong with you? What are you doing that? Hey, so forget that guy. So he insulted you, big deal. Don't look at him. Get on with the campaign. But he can't. Very hard for him. Maybe now he won't do that anymore because I think he's really on the right track. But people don't understand. The reason why the Russian chose him, you see, is because he's so sensitive to that type of insult. And therefore he will defy anybody. That's his milah. That's his virtue. People don't understand. God needs a guy that's going to stand up to the world, to the United Nations, to Europe, to everybody. You need what's called a chutzpah, and he's got it in spades. That's exactly what his virtue is. So the fact that he all of a sudden went, butted heads with the guy, the Muslim, where his kid died, which is unfortunate. I mean, the kid is really a hero, his son and so on, Okay, so he butted heads with the guy. So on one side, hey, what are you doing, guys? And so on. Whatever, The truth is he didn't really do that. He said the guy was a hero. And whatever. He just felt the other guy was biased and so on. The father. But the main idea is that this display of inability to suffer an insult is exactly why he's the main guy for the candidate. That he's the candidate. Because that chutzpah, that inability to see wrong, he can't suffer, he cannot tolerate it. So if he can't even tolerate it with some local guy, is speaking out against him, could you imagine some country that's going to really try to do something bad against America? Or somebody that he believes in like Israel, and they're going to try to do something against Israel? Could you imagine what Trump is going to do? People don't understand. That's exactly what his virtue is. Interesting. It's just what's called exactly the reverse of what people understand. Because they don't understand really what's about to happen and why Trump is there. Anyway, so that's a very, very important concept, which is what I just said and so on. It's something else which is very important, which I will say, What is happening? You now understand a certain context of what's happening. That Esav is going to have a tahara to allow many things to happen. And the tahara is to go from Yahweh to inflict pain on the Jews to Yahweh to serve the Jews. Which means that, like I said, that Trump in many ways is a messianic figure for Edom, of course not for the Jews, because he's going to reverse a great deal of things in America. But what does that mean? What it means is something which is astounding. If what I'm saying is true, and I want to tell you something up front, I don't know what the Moshe is going to do. He doesn't speak to me. And I have no idea. Nobody really knows, because the problem is only a Novi can know. And the problem is that, if a person sins or whatever, that can alter the whole course of history. If major Jews sin, that alters the whole zera, the whole course of history, and all of a sudden God chooses another path. So ultimately, we don't really know. But what I want to explain is that if Trump wins, which I believe he will, this is the underlying hashkafa, as far as I'm concerned. But what's also important is if I am right that this is the underlying hashkafa, if Edom is about to have a tahara, could you imagine the Jews? That means we're witnessing the beginning of the redemption. Sounds interesting. That means if he wins, and I believe he will, that means the messianic process is starting. Because the first one to have a tahara is Edom, and then the next one is the Jews. Okay? That's a staggering concept. And now you understand what's going on. To what period of history is this similar? You know what it's similar to? When the Jews got out of Egypt, they were about to cross the Red Sea. And the Medrash tells us, Chazal, that there was an enormous court case in heaven where the Satan was trying to stop his Egyptians from dying and the Jews from getting out. because that was the beginning of the Messianic, the Geula, the redemption. And the Jews are going to go through the Red Sea, receive the Torah, and if you remember, that Torah was the Or Rishon, and Moshe Rabbeinu was Mashiach ben Yosef. This was the end. And the Satan was going bananas, because he knew what was about to happen. So he was Mekatrig, he prosecuted, where he said the following, in court, right before Kriyas Samsov. He said, wait a minute, the Egyptians worship idols, that's true, but the Jews also worship idols. Halolu oidiv kachobim, they worship idols. The halolu oidiv kachobim, and they worship idols. Why do you want to save the Jews and destroy my people, the Egyptians? Interesting. Why was he so adamant? Because this was the beginning of redemption. That's why. And he was going absolutely bananas. You see. This is what's happening now. If I'm correct, and this is the hashkafa of the end, that's why everybody's against Trump. Because it's not them only, it's the Satan and also the Malach of Yishmael, because he's going to demote the Arabs and so on, right? They're going crazy. So they're unleashing all their forces. Obama, Hillary, the UN, or whatever, the media, right? The Republicans. It's like a complete desperate attempt to destroy this man that will begin to usher in a whole different period of time for the Jews. It's the end. This is exactly equal to Kriyas Samsov. That's why you're seeing an ongoing, incredibly intense onslaught of this man, which is abnormal. I mean, you see it. It never happened. This has never happened in American history. What is going on today?
Of all
What?
previous campaigns?
Nothing matches this. Nothing like this. I mean, if that man says anything, they take it and twist it where they degrade the guy. It's unbelievable.
Like Goldwater, it was also no, it wasn't like this.
This is beyond belief. The what do you call it? The lashon hara. It's really what it is. The mitzvah shemra, the slander, the lies, and so on and so forth that is being said now is beyond belief. With everybody, not just Hillary and Obama. I mean, Obama has to lose his whole legacy, and Hillary, of course, is going to lose her claim to fame, the maniacal power, and so on. And now, I want to tell you something. It's great for Hillary. You know why? Until now, she sold her offices, pay for play. You want a favor? Yeah. Okay, I have a foundation. $20 million to get you a favor from the Secretary of State. That's what she was doing. Could you imagine what she's going to do when she's president? Mm-hmm. If this is what she did when she's Secretary of State, right? And she was endangering herself. She was, because it's illegal. It's incredible. It's a conflict of interest. It's corruption of her office. She was selling her office to the highest bidder. I shouldn't say the highest bidder, to any bidder. Could you imagine what she's going to do when she's president? It's going to be a wholesale sale. It's going to say government for sale, right? All you have to do is give money to my foundation, and you're in. We will give you money, State Department, this, funds, Defense Department, you name it. We'll give you everything. Just hand over the cash to my foundation. People don't understand that. They're stupid. If this is what she did as a Secretary of State, which is, how much power does she really have? As president, it's a wholesale sale. That's what it's going to be. And they still don't care. But anyway, we understand what's going on. Because I believe we are looking at a time period that this is the beginning of something incredibly significant for the Jewish people. And that's what's very important. And if I am right, there is a way to stop Hillary. There's a way. Oh, because let's go back. Let's go back to Kriyas Samsov. God revealed the way. What was that way? It says in the Medrash that the Jews were redeemed from Egypt. It says because they didn't speak, they kept their language, their dress, and their names. But that's not why they were redeemed. That's what made them Jews. Therefore, they still had the identity Jew. If they didn't have that, they wouldn't even be Jewish, they'd just be Egyptians. So therefore, they had to retain the status of Jew. Fine. But what got them out is no lashon hara. The Medrash says 3 times, Lo nigalu Yisrael miMitzrayim. The only reason why the Jews got out of Egypt, Shelo Hoyuban Dil Turya, there was nobody in the Jewish people that spoke Lashon Hara. Now forget about why, but it was because they didn't speak Lashon Hara. Why? Because the Sultan was up there screaming, you can't let him out. Why? Because they were supposed to be at 10 years. They had 190 years missing. What are you doing? So what the Baruch Shem needed is, if you talk Lashon Hara, you initiate the judicial court. I'm getting into the whole thing. That's what happens. When you talk Lashon Hara, all of a sudden the court takes a look at your cases. You initiate the judicial procedure. So therefore, but if you don't talk Lashon Hara, it's very difficult for the Sultan to prosecute you. So therefore, if the Jews did not speak Lashon Hara, there's no kitrugim, you see. All of a sudden, then God could take them out, even though they're 190 years short. You see? You're going to tell me, wait a minute. So then why was there a whole argument in heaven that these worship idols and these worship idols? How'd that start? And the answer is because the Jews began talking Lashon Hara, Kriyas Yamsuf. They were saying, what, there was no graves in Egypt that you had to take us out? They were slandering God and Moshe Rabbeinu. So that little amount of slander provoked or invoked the whole judicial process, which was the Sultan saying, they worship idols and they, you see? So what did Moshe Rabbeinu say? Unbelievable. Now you understand. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, Hisyatzvu ru'u, watch, it's Yeshua's Hashem, the salvation of God. Hashem yilochem yilchem. You stand back. God will fight for you, and v'atem tachrishon, be silent. What do you mean be silent? What is this? What's that going to do? If they're silent or not? Because if you're not silent, you're going to talk Lashon Hara. And if you talk Lashon Hara, the guy's not going to stop. And because he's right in justice, because they do worship idols, you guys are not going to get through the Kriyas Yamsuf. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, incredible. He gave the advice. Don't talk Lashon Hara. Shut up. Oh, nobody hears this. You hear what he said? Yatem tachrishim. It's astounding what Moshe said, because he's right. If the Jews only got out because they didn't speak Lashon Hara, they don't stop. They're not getting out. So that's what he said. V'atem tachrishim. Be silent. Stop with the Lashon Hara. No kitrugim, and you're out. You're redeemed. Therefore, if that's true, if somehow something will happen that the Jews won't speak Lashon Hara, the Sultan will stop his ketrugim, and Trump will win.
No, what else?
Don't ask me how that's going to happen, although I have an idea. But anyway. What?
It's Chaim Heritage.
Yes, yeah, maybe.
It's
Maybe.
becoming very popular. No, I'm saying
Getting
it's
very
becoming
popular.
starker.
Yeah,
Just
maybe.
now, even more now, they had something even more that make Chizuk and not speaking Lashon Hara.
When? In the Tisha B'Av event?
Some lady,
Well, they had a convention.
No, but I'm saying, but some lady now, within 3 days, she got 6,000 people, 6,000 from you to join in together to be Makabel not to talk Lashon Hara.
Where? In Lakewood? All over.
Throughout the world, yeah.
Who's this?
I just some happened. She went
Yeah,
to-
so it's, we don't realize, if Jews do not speak Lashon Hara, you know, I believe Trump is in. V'atem tachrishon. It sounds weird. You know what's going to happen? The Jews are going to say, wait a minute, is that true? I want Hillary. I'm going to talk all the Lashon Hara I want. I'm afraid that's going to happen. What?
They're doing it already.
Yeah, I know, they're doing it already. But I just want to put, you don't realize the Torah gives the refuah, the remedy of how to bring the Mashiach. Because that's exactly, remember what it says, Hine al goalti eschem gracious. Behold, I will redeem you in the end, just like I redeemed you in the beginning. How did God redeem us? Because no Lashon Hara. And that's also, and that's, by the way, why Shmiras HaLashon is all over the place. Same idea. Because the Baruch Shem needs Klal Yisrael not to talk Lashon Hara, so even though the Jews really don't deserve to get out, he's got to stop the prosecutions, and Bemo, the Jews will have redemption. Why do you think there's such a tremendous awareness and consciousness of Lashon Hara today? You think it's an accident? Of course not. It's in order to get, the Baruch Shem is trying to get the Jews to prosecute, and you guys will get out. That's why there's a tremendous movement since 1985. Tremendous movement, consciousness, and awareness to stop Lashon Hara. You don't realize this is by design. This is by divine design. That's why Jews all of a sudden, it never happened before. Think about that. Chofetz Chaim wrote his book in 1871. That's when he wrote his book. Or 1873. I'm talking about the Shmir Salot, Chofetz Chaim Shmir Salot. I'm not talking about the Mishnah Berurah, right? So how come that's 130? That's 140 years ago, right? What happened? How come there's no movement then? So there's a divine assistance, unbelievable sight Shmayon. I'm telling you what's real, by the way. This isn't fake. This is a real McCoy. The reason why there's a movement of Shmir Saloshim, right, is in order to stop the Satan to bring the redemption. And I'm hoping it's working. V'atem tachrishim. You see? And therefore I'm hoping that will stop. No ketrugim. And all of a sudden Trump will win. Begin that process. And the rehabilitation starts. And bemo, we are at the beginning of the end.
Does Tahar always mean he's